Welcome to Utah Stories. So, on the program today, we've got a man who I discovered probably 13, 14 years ago working at the National Weather Service by the airport. And I discovered these incredible little PowerPoints that he put together, I believe, every single week, where he would go over the snowpack totals, the impact it would have on the reservoirs, the big radar look at the weather systems that were churning up and kind of the weather pattern we were in for a more longer period of time. And I just found him super fascinating. I'm kind of a weather nerd. I like to just try to understand weather better, because what's kind of fascinating to me is how horrible we are at predicting the weather. It's like, it was supposed to rain this week. I don't think I've seen it fall on the ground. Brian, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for the invite.
So I guess I want to ask you to begin with, I watch the weather in the morning. I watch it a lot on my phone. I'm always looking at the weather updates. Sometimes it's spot on. Sometimes they just really nail it.
Yeah.
But then sometimes, like this week, it was supposed to rain. I mean, and we kept saying it was going to rain, but then it just didn't. Why is it so difficult for us to predict the weather?
So when you think of forecasting the weather, we look at basically trying to quantify the atmosphere, right? And it's such a phenomenally difficult job to actually say what is the weather going to do 3 days out, 5 days out, and 7 days out. And so for this storm you were seeing today, I was actually out in the mountains and it was raining and it was snowing. But people who are in maybe just a slightly different location, it doesn't rain on them, so they think it's a bust of a forecast. The forecasting, actually, when you look at statistically, it's gotten much better over time. 3-day forecast is quite accurate. 5 days, not so much. And 7 days, it's just kind of fairy tale land. It's an idea of how it works. Mm-hmm. The other issue is we don't have data over the Pacific Ocean, and weather moves from west to east. We have every day at 4 a.m. and 4 p.m., the National Weather Service, every office in the entire country, including Alaska, Hawaii, and some of the other little island areas, launch a weather balloon. And then that data is taken, so we get a 3D rendering of the atmosphere. All the offices send that back, and it's put into a really complex model that models the atmosphere as a fluid. And then you look at moisture and pressure and temperature, put that all in there, and then you get a forecast.
So that's moisture, temperature, pressure at a level, atmospheric level, depending on the how high.
And typically the weather balloons go to about 100,000 feet. They're actually in space when they pop, and then a little parachute opens and it just kind of floats down, and we never see the instrument again. It's really old technology, but it really works quite well. But when you're trying to say what's coming at us and you have none of that ability over the Pacific Ocean, you're data void to some extent. There's other ways you can look at it, like satellites and those kinds of things. But we're trying to quantify an atmosphere that's constantly moving and dynamic. And when we first did this, way back when, it was really terrible. They just didn't have the tools. Now we have much better tools, much better science. We have different models they look at. And when I say I retired from the Weather Service 3.5 years ago. And now I'm just back with Salt Lake City helping with this runoff. But it's a difficult process, but they're doing the best they can, and it actually works pretty well for the most part. When you really look at what the Weather Service forecasts, it usually pans out within 3 days, maybe 5 days. Mm-hmm. Not so much 7 days or beyond. If you ever see a 10-day forecast, it's just kind of silliness.
Yeah, and so what you're saying is the National Weather Service does the weather balloons, mm-hmm. and they actually get the data that the meteorologists on the TV use. Is that really all of the data you were providing that to them?
Yeah, and when you think of the radar, when you see Super Doppler radar or the different TV stations, that's the National Weather Service's radar. All the data, all the technicians that go to make sure it keeps working, all of the model data that's put into is back in Asheville, North Carolina, and and run through processors and supercomputers. And there's a lot of infrastructure that goes out to the public, and it's really done to protect the public from severe weather or help with commerce. Mm-hmm. That's why the National Weather Service is in the Department of Commerce, to help farmers and ranchers and people who grow things get a better weather forecast so they can take care of it, so we don't freeze cherry blossoms or cherry trees in certain areas, those kinds of things.
Yeah.
So it's then the data is taken by the public sector or the private sector, and then they use it on the TV weather, and that's fine because really they do a pretty good job of saying what the weather is.
Yeah.
They can encapsulate the entire state of Utah on the weather in 2 minutes, which is a skill in itself.
Yeah, it's just interesting. Sometimes they're spot on, and then sometimes they're just way off. And I guess it's just there's just so much data and so much unknowns that can occur. Either I don't know as much as
right. And when you look at even long range forecast, we only capture 25% of the variability when we look at El Nino or La Nina, those types of things in the equatorial Pacific. The rest of the ocean could be warm and cool, but we really don't have a way to come up with a better weather forecast than what we have right now. It's improving, and it will continue to improve as the science progresses, but it's a difficult job. But if you actually work in the Weather Service over time, you see they do a very good job of this kind of thing.
So now this year they've been describing it as like an atmospheric river that we've had, just this amazing amount of moisture and snowpack. What is it, this anomaly we're experiencing that we've had this year that's so unique that we only really can compare it to 1983 in the past?
So when you look at the weather we've had roughly for the 1980s, and you progress forward in years, high pressure early on in the 80s may be the dominant weather feature for 2 weeks, maybe early January. That's when we'd expect it. But with a warming climate, the way the jet stream flows, it's becoming more circuitous. It's becoming more wiggly. It used to go straight around for the most part, little wiggles. But as the jet stream is slowed due to the Arctic area being much warmer than the equator, the difference in temperature used to be really cold up near the poles and really warm near the equator. Now it's a little bit warmer up in the poles and about the same temperature of the equator.
You mean the atmospheric temperature is warmer at the poles
than it used to be?
Oh, than it used
relatively
to be.
From what we saw before we were warming.
Okay.
And so that gradient used to go from, freezing cold in the Arctic to pretty warm in the equator. Well, now that area up in the Arctic has gotten much warmer. So the jet stream that goes around and it's just trying to equilibrate temperature, pressure, and moisture has slowed down a little bit. And when it slows, it becomes more circuitous. And unfortunately for the western U.S., when it's gone into that kind of a big bend, it's high pressure that rotates around the western U.S. And that means dry conditions, lack of storms, and inverted air quality. And that has been the dominant weather feature now for up to 2.5 months, what we've seen. That's why we're so dry. That's why the reservoirs are drying up, Lake Powell's drying up, the Great Salt Lake is drying up.
You mean for the last 2.5 years?
This has really been going on since about 1990, 1980s.
Yeah,
it's
almost 2 decades it's been.
Long time.
Yeah.
But as the atmosphere is very dynamic, that changes. And so what happened was high pressure shrunk up, went down by Mexico. So if you can envision a clockwise rotating weather feature, and then you look up by British Columbia, there's a low that sits out there and it rotates counterclockwise. And if you've ever seen those pitching machines where the 2 tires spin in opposite directions and the coach will hold up the ball and drop it in and it shoots the ball out, think of that over the Pacific Ocean, and a moisture-laden area down by Hawaii is being pulled in, and it's a narrow band, and it's moisture-laden, phenomenal amounts of moisture in these things. And it extends from Hawaii into the West Coast. And it's roughly about 10 to 15 times the flow of the Mississippi River in one atmospheric river.
Wow.
And it's low-level moisture, so all it takes is a little bit of bump for it to go up, and that's usually the mountains of California. And then it precipitates out a phenomenal amount.
And is that moisture so extensive because the ocean is warmer.
It's
So
warmer.
we're getting more evaporation.
And we get a warmer atmosphere. For every degree centigrade, you raise the atmospheric moisture. You can raise for every degree centigrade, you raise the temperature, you get a 7% increase in atmospheric moisture.
Oh, wow.
And it's like compound interest. For every degree Fahrenheit, you keep going, or centigrade, you keep going up. You keep raising that atmospheric moisture. And we've warmed roughly in Utah about 2 to 3 degrees Fahrenheit. But overall, it can hold more moisture. So now you typically get 3 atmospheric rivers, maybe 4 a year, and that takes care of California's water supply. They're good. They don't want any more. This year, I read where we're up to 30 atmospheric rivers on the West Coast.
Wow.
It just keeps coming. All the weather, for the most part, has become more extreme. Our thunderstorms are more extreme. Our dry conditions are more extreme. The heat is more extreme. But unfortunately for the West, our dominant weather feature is just high pressure, dry conditions, and it's only getting worse. This is probably a one-off. Maybe next year we'll have a little bit, but most likely we're going to go back to high pressure, dry conditions, and we're just going to continue to have water issues here in Utah.
So if you went back and looked at the way things were in the early winter, could have anybody predicted that this winter would be so huge based on the conditions you could see, I don't know, over the Pacific and in Hawaii, like you said?
Probably not. I don't think long-range weather forecasting, when we talk about is it going to rain today or within the next 3 to 5 days, long-range weather forecasting is really poor.
So the almanac that says this is going to be
That's
dry,
nonsense.
it just doesn't work at all.
Yeah, that's nonsense. The Farmer's Almanac, it's fun to give it to your friends, but you don't want to bet the farm, and it's very general, and it's nonsense. For the people who do long-range forecasting, I've been to conferences. This is back when I still worked for the Weather Service, but they would have all these really smart people, PhD people in atmospheric sciences, give one paper after another, and each one would say there's no conclusive results. They can't really find that key to what's going to be long-range weather forecasting.
Yeah.
So it's kind of folly. Lately, what I've seen, and granted, I've been retired, is they just go with what's happening in a typical drought-laden atmospheric warming year where we're dry and hot, and maybe go with that. That's what I've seen.
Yeah, and so now we shift gears and like look at the situation we've got along the Wasatch Front that Salt Lake County and Summit County and all the back and Wasatch Front are going to have to deal with. Above, about 7,000 feet, you've got more snowpack later in the year than we've ever seen before. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's right around there, maybe even a little lower, 6,800 feet. And currently in some of these drainages along Salt Lake, like City Creek, is up to 500% for this time of year. At 6,800 feet, typically your snowpack is going to be totally melted out within maybe a week. And right now we've got 500% of what you typically get. Granted, the percentages go up really fast because we're almost dropping out. But we have like 36 inches of water sitting up on that hill that needs to be melted out. Now, we looked when we were flooding Emigration earlier, about a week or two ago. It was really nice to have cooler temperatures to slow that meltdown. But now we're at a stage we're sliding into May. We need to start melting at about 1 inch to 1.5 inches per day off of the mountain. We're only getting maybe 1/10 to 1/2 an inch because it's been so cold. And every day we delay this, we slide into the middle of May and the end of May where temperatures can get up to 90 degrees. And more importantly, the sun's angle becomes much higher. And it's solar radiation that melts snow. That's the biggest energy input to a snowpack. Snowpack typically is like a puffy jacket. It insulates from the outside air. That's why if you dig a snow cave, you can stay warm as opposed to out. So when you have bright sunshine at a higher angle that you see in mid-May, late May, then you start melting up in the range of 2 inches per day, maybe 3 inches per day. And the drainages here are formed over thousands of years from flows they routinely see. When you have 2 to 3 times to 4 times the normal snowpack that's going to come out, your window of opportunity to alleviate any flood threat becomes quite small when we delay and we keep moving in. And we've got such a giant snowpack. at the mid and low elevation right now. Low elevation is slowly getting melted off, but it's the mid elevation now that's really concerning. Looks like maybe we'll start warming up next week by Thursday, if you look at the weather reports. And at that time, that's when we should start picking up melt rates to about 1 inch. Another thing with a giant snowpack like we have this year is it's frozen up. It's not isothermal, meaning there's cold pockets in there. So if you get melt on the very surface of the snow and it starts to infiltrate into the snowpack, it'll hit those cold pockets and just freeze up again. So you don't really have much coming out until it's 32 degrees Fahrenheit, top to bottom, or 0 degrees centigrade. And once that melt from the top can trickle through and make it to the surface, and now you've got really good conditions, so it doesn't evaporate, it doesn't transpire, it just makes its way into the creek. It's very efficient. Our problems in the low years was we melt early. So it becomes isothermal way too soon. You get meltwater coming out of the snowpack, and then it just evaporates. Plants come back early. They pull it up in the roots, and they transpire it out in the leaves, and you lose it. We could use a little of that, but it's not going to happen this year. There is just snow at those elevations down to 6,800, 6,500 feet, even 6,200 feet at some of the north facing. So, I mean, it's good for water supply, but now how's it going to come off is the question.
Yeah, we're showing images of Immigration Creek and the flooding that was there. Not this past week, but the week before.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously this was huge and way more than the capacity of the infrastructure there. Do you anticipate that's going to be widespread in all the creeks running down?
It depends how it comes off. We've had really big years in the past, and if you can have a delicate balance of temperature and cloud cover, you can bring this off without much problems. The problem lies in our cities and places where we build homes and our infrastructure. While there's been great improvements through Salt Lake City from when you look at 1983, they've engineered this really well. It's much better than what I remember when I used to work for the Weather Service. But most likely we're going to have some problem somewhere. There's going to be a log or a root ball that's going to get stuck under a pipe, and we're going to flood a road here and there. If we are at peak flow melt sometime in late May, and then we start getting thunderstorms or a widespread long duration rain event that's going to just put down a lot of rain, 1 inch or 2 rain or more, then we could have some serious problems. But you have to weigh how it's coming off, and are we going to see that? So far, we've been very fortunate with no rain. We had a brief warm-up, but that was just due to the crazy storm we had 2 weeks prior. We had snow down to 5,000 feet on both south and north aspects, and that's what produced the flows out of Immigration. We've melted that off, so now we're seeing what's going to happen with the warm-up come mid-next week.
So what would worst case scenario look like, first of all, and then we'll go into best case scenario?
So worst case scenario is we start melting snow at 2 inches per day. We crank the temperatures up to 80, 90 degrees. We have bright sunshine with no clouds. And then we get a long duration, widespread, low elevation rain event that just soaks everything. That's when
high temperatures followed by rain. That's what we don't want.
Yeah, because think of the mountains right now, or in about a week from now, they're going to be putting out 1 inch per day melt all across where you see snow. So under there, 1 inch of water is coming down, and the channels can hold that. What if we rain 2 inches widespread across the entire basin? Now theoretically, we've got melt rates up to 3 inches per hour. The channels aren't used to that. They're not formed by flows they see like that. And then put on top of that consecutive 24-hour melt cycles, we'll just have too much water. The most optimal scenario is we pick it up next week. We have melt rates of about 1 inch to 1.5 inches per day for about a week, and then maybe slow it down a little bit, let it drain out a little bit, maybe 2 days of cloud cover, maybe a little cooler temperatures. Then bring it back up, pick the melt up to 1.5 inches per day, and then slow it down again. Pick it up again until we're basically out of low and mid elevation snow. Even if you have high elevation snow, it's still, when you think of the mountains, the aerial extent, it gets smaller as the higher you go until you're standing on top of the peaks around there. High elevation snow is still okay because then you don't have as much snow. It's that mid elevation. And right now, that's the problem because we have so much snow at that mid elevation, 7,000 feet, like you mentioned earlier.
Mm-hmm. Huh. So if say the worst case scenario happens and we get up to 2 inches of melt, another inch on top with rainfall, will everybody's houses potentially see flooding? Will all of our streets be covered in water?
No, we won't see that. What you'll see is overbank flows.
Just the people next to the rivers are in danger.
Yeah, around there. You will probably see some problems with basement flooding. But it's the people who live around the streams or some of the intersections and roads that are around the stream. We'll see overbank flows over the roads most likely. But since I have transitioned from working with the Weather Service to retiring for 3 years, now I'm consulting with Salt Lake City as a hydrologist. I've learned that they've got so much infrastructure that they can really alleviate a lot of problems that when I was just starting back in the 90s wasn't the case. Mm-hmm. There just wasn't. They've engineered a lot of this. They have game plans on how to do this. The engineers meet frequently just to game plan this and figure out where their choke points are, where the narrowing, where they're going to have problems. And then they stage equipment at these locations to get things out quick. The biggest problem, along with the scenarios that we're talking about, is if you have a jam in one of the streams, then that kind of changes the trajectory of the water. I think immigration is a really good example of how they controlled that so fast. The engineers got out there. They had help putting out sandbags and channeled that water.
It was amazing. I couldn't believe how many people showed up.
Yeah.
I was like, nobody's going to show up. Everybody's into their phones and watching YouTube videos and whatever. But it was great. I mean, Troy showed that footage already. It was like hundreds of volunteers. All the materials were right there, and they definitely do have a game plan.
And it looked really cool. I mean, it looked like a new channel right through the area, and they saved a lot of damage through that effort. So when I've met with them, I was not privy to what they were doing. My area that I forecasted for was the entire state. Now I'm just down to Salt Lake City in the county. I don't anticipate a lot of crazy problems like we had before, but you don't know until it happens. But we do have a snowpack that's quite large.
And are we expecting a wet May, or can you tell? Or
no, we're back to that question of how good is the weather forecast in really 3 to 5 days. I mean, I met with Glenn Merrill, who is the hydrologist for the Weather Service now in Salt Lake City, and he indicated that we should start warming up by Thursday, and then we'll see. Maybe a couple of weak systems are going to come through that'll cool it off a little. But I think we're done with this, winter weather. I think we'll just be kind of nice weather followed by a little chilly weather and some rain. But so far, nothing like that. I know.
Gosh, every time I'm excited because it's warm, you get dumped on. It's cold again, and I'm ready for it to end.
I mean, we've been doing this since November, but the skiing's been fabulous. It's been so good. But right, everybody's ready for flip-flops and T-shirts and shorts and that kind of thing, right? I agree.
I thought I would only talk to you for a few minutes, but I think what you do is fascinating.
Good.
I mean, your knowledge and your depth of the understanding is really interesting.
Thank you.
We've got these slides. I think it's probably better we'll put them up on our website. We've got slides about City Creek. I guess we'll show one of them. This is the water supply forecast. And can you just explain what we've got on the screen right here?
Yeah, so on January 1st, if you look on the x-axis, there's that vertical line, the red line, and there's a dot in the middle. That's 50% of what we think the most probable. So how this forecast is made is the Colorado Basin River Forecast Center, which is part of the Weather Service, they take a look at what's the snow right now. Like, what do you know? We know the snow. We know the soil moisture. And then what we don't know is what's the weather. So they go back 30 years. And they go back to 1991 and say, what was the weather during 1991? And they take that weather, which is precip and temperature, and then they put it into the model and run the model. And they get like a little line that goes out, 92, 93. So you get this spaghetti plot. And they look right in the middle where that middle dot is, where that blue line comes across. And that's the most probable forecast on January 1st. Then they move to February 1st. And then you do the same thing. That's a vertical line. The blue line that connects the two is the model that runs every day. They call it ESP. It runs every day. And so you can see January first forecast was low because you really don't know you're going to have this bomber year because we can only forecast weather 5 days out. And then it got a little bigger in February, then March. And then April, the forecast jumped up dramatically.
So that's this jump here between here and here.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Right? And then you see the model was still going up. Now, at the top of that kind of shaded blue area, that's the 10th percentile, meaning it could get up there, but there's probably only a 10% chance. If you look at the bottom of that shaded blue area, that's the 90th percentile. That's what they think right now. That's what's going to happen. And so at the 50th percentile, meaning most likely occurrence, is that middle dot in there. And these forecasts are really well done. It's good science. They do a good job of quality controlling this. And if you look now, the latest official forecast is 207% of median. There is twice the water volume in City Creek right now than what we typically see, which is 100%. We have twice.
Wow.
How is it going to come off? It comes off slow, we're okay. If it comes off in a crazy...
If that gets up to 300%, we're kind of screwed.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. You don't want to see any of those numbers. Twice as much is still too much. It's good for water supply, but controlling that much water is a little difficult. So
yeah. All right. Well, this is awesome.
Yep.
I think that the last question I wanted to know, will this make a significant impact on the Great Salt Lake? I think everybody's hoping it is. And the marina where the boats are stored looks way better than it looked last year or the year before.
Yeah, it'll improve it.
Yeah.
But if you look at the big picture, the Salt Lake is going to dry up for the most part. Lake Powell will probably dry up. It's just where we are with the pattern. It is where we are with a warming climate. And they've had studies way back that showed when I first started the job that anytime you have a terminal lake in a warming climate, they've gone away.
So for you, it's not if, it's just when.
Just when, right?
That's not good.
I mean, they'll try and do something, but for too many years, we've over-allocated the water going into the Salt Lake, and then we just have a reduction in runoff because eventually with this warming climate, we're going to go into a rain-driven hydrology in this latter half of this.
Now, we've over-allocated the water going into the Great Salt Lake?
Yeah. Up in the Bear River drainage, it's just been doled out before it gets down to the Great Salt Lake.
Over-allocated before it gets to the lake. Yeah.
So it doesn't even arrive at the Great Salt Lake.
And everybody here's got to have big green lawns when we live in the desert, and it doesn't make any sense. And we just got to change our water habits completely.
And really, it's going to get drier just because we have less spring snowmelt runoff. The volumes of water coming out of the mountains every year becomes less and less. And eventually, we're just going to see rain in the wintertime. We won't have snow.
Well, one thing I thought about is like if the climate's warming and the oceans warm up and the evaporation increases from the oceans, isn't that going to continue to have more significant snowpack and more rainfall because of the warmer oceans, or is that just going to be an anomaly?
You think of the high pressure during the wintertime, drier conditions. The weather comes off the Pacific. It's shunted north into Canada or down south, mostly north. It's going to get wetter farther north you go, but it's going to get drier here in right
because
above.
We'll have the high pressure.
We'll be dealing with high pressure. Really, north of Ogden will get wetter. South of Ogden will get drier all the way down to Mexico and down in those areas. Another thing is we're going to be much warmer, so we won't be snowing. It'll be raining the majority of the winter till eventually about 2070, 2080. We'll just have a rain-driven hydrology here. Spring snow, winter snow will be a gone. And when we talk about intense weather, we'll have deluges of rain in the wintertime. But what if it rains locally in some areas that don't have a reservoir right below it? The whole system is predicated on spring snowmelt runoff. That's going to change. How do we deal with it? When I talked to the water districts about this, when I still worked and I was the climate change scientist for the Weather Service, they didn't really have a good answer. It's something that's kind of beyond where they'd like to go. They are embracing that we are warming and we are getting drier. They're trying to store more water, but things are going to have to change. It's just how it is. We just won't have the water. And then the problem with the Great Salt Lake when it dries up is we're going to have this alkaline dust blowing off of there into the most populated area of the state, which is going to cause respiratory issues like we haven't seen before.
That doesn't sound good.
It's not good. It's not.
Well, I sure appreciate you coming on, Brian.
Yeah, thanks for the invite.
Yeah, thanks for
Anytime.
your insight. All right, and we're going to have one more segment for those of you who are joining us live, trying out Daniel's salsas, and they're amazing. So join us for that. We're going to take a brief break. We'll be right back.